So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, for this morning plenary session on the general challenges in nanomedicine. I'm Gerrit Borchardt. I'm a professor in biopharmaceutics at the University of Geneva, and I have the privilege to chair this session. We have a full program of very expert speakers here. I'd like to ask the speakers to stay to their allotted time slots of 20 minutes in total. Otherwise, I have an app with Swiss cowbells to rudely interrupt the speaker. So we start the session with the first presentation by Anil Patri. Anil is, for several years, the director of the core nanotechnology facilities of FDA at Jefferson in Arkansas. Anil.
Thank you, Gerrit. It's a pleasure to be here. And I would like to thank BR for this wonderful conference. So this year, I would like to update you all on the collaborative efforts by global regulatory community, standards development organizations, and other stakeholders to come together and have significant efforts in building consensus on what standards do we need in nanotechnology. So as you all know, we are facing many challenges and this is a session about talking about challenges, but I would like to talk about the standards that would help with those challenges. Again, I'm from FDA, and then I have a research lab, and the disclaimer, the views expressed here are my own and should not be considered as official position or policy of FDA. As you can see here, the US government funding in nanotechnology reached a steady state. And most of the funding from different government agencies in nanotechnology go to different applications, and especially from the Department of Human Health Services, DHHS, which is NIH is part of DHHS, as does FDA. The funding that goes into the community to develop basic and medical research, drug discovery and development, along with devices and imaging agents, eventually lead to FDA as regulatory submissions. And this data, as you can see, is from the National Nanotechnology Initiative. This is the latest data we have as of last year. But as you can see in the next slide, we do see increase in the submissions of nanotechnology. And again, this is the latest data. My colleague Catherine Tyner is going to talk about more of the analysis of this data. This just came out a few weeks ago in Nature Nanotechnology. If you see this data, the blue bars are IND submissions, which are investigational new drug submissions with FDA. I guess the green bars are ANDAs, and the NDA is a new drug application that is post-clinical trials. And so you can see a gradual increase over the years of increased submissions of INDs with more complex drugs coming through in nanotechnology. But the same trend we see in devices. Again, I don't have the latest data on devices from the CDRH, so we see many devices coming through submission to FDA. So we need standards to facilitate regulatory review and approval. So we do need standards, both as regulators as well as industry, to facilitate evaluation of products through basic science-based methodologies. We can streamline the pre-market evaluation as well as a post-market surveillance of these products. And then you can bring the stakeholders together, both the, let's say, nanotechnology instrument manufacturers, companies that develop the nanotechnology, as well as regulators, through these standards development organizations, whether we work through ISO, ASTM, USP, European Pharmacopoeia, to develop these standards. And also they lead to international harmonization. So when I say standards, standards mean different things to different people. And what I really mean in this case is documentary standards and material standards. So by documentary standards, from my perspective, are the test methods, the guides, the protocols the guidance documents that the regulatory agencies put out, and the technical specifications, such as ISO technical specifications. Material standards are actually physical material that includes reference material that, for example, NIST produces, and I can show some examples of that. Certified reference material, standard reference material, each of them have different degree of certainty in the measurements and documentation required. So just to make sure that the documentary standards I refer to are these guides, and then the material standards are actually test material. So we had recently a global summit on regulatory science, and then my presentation mainly covers what we discussed in the global summit on standards that are needed in different areas. So this is a brief overview of the progress we made over more than 10 years. And NIST actually had, NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology in US. They had a USMS workshop on measurement and standards issues in nanobiotechnology back in 2006. Again, we have been talking about these issues for more than 10 years, and we actually need to develop standards. The previous lab that I worked at and presented on this podium many times from NCL, the Nanotechnology Characterization Lab, developed many protocols, both internal protocols and also in collaboration with NIST. From 2005, there are more than 40 different protocols that are publicly available on their website. NIST also developed the first nanoscale gold reference material standards at 10, 30, and 60 nanometer nominal size colloidal gold. And the ISO TC 229 nanotechnology has more than 50, I don't know the exact number to date, and then ASTM also produced 20 documentary standards, and also OECD, Working Party on Manufacturing Nanomaterial, produced many guidance documents. JRC, I think it's IRMM, developed silica reference material. I think there are more than what I have here, and then we can update based on what are currently available. So the global summit actually brought all these stakeholders together, and you can see the co-organizers are from different organizations throughout the globe. So we had people from 19 countries, around 200 people, and we had this meeting at the National Institute of Health last year on a collaborative effort by global regulatory standards and research agencies, organizations, stakeholders from academia and industry to come up with a list of standards that we need to address the challenges. Again, this is a very difficult thing to do if you have ever done any development of nanotechnology standards. Whether you do reference material standards, takes many years to develop a good reference material standard, as well as consensus-based guidance documents. You have to address each and every comment that comes through. So it takes years in many times to develop these standards. So we came through some consensus. So the goals of this are to educate a broad group of stakeholders about the state of art and what is available in nanotechnology standards, and identify the most immediate needs in nanotechnology science, the measurement methods. These are the test methods, for example, and guides, and standards relevant for regulatory applications. When I say regulatory applications, the needs for EPA and occupational safety may be different, and ECHA-based regulations may be different from agencies like FDA, where we see more of the biomedical products. So we really focused this meeting on these biomedical-related nanotechnology, intentionally engineered and used. And also the third goal is to facilitate greater coordination between the stakeholders in the development of these standards. So we had 6 dedicated sessions on these topics, and a plenary session to review the existing framework and existing standards in nanotechnology. Again, as I said, we need to understand what is currently available, what is being developed, and what is in the pipeline, and then develop the relevant standards that we really need for regulatory purposes. And so that includes nanotechnology-derived drug products, the medical devices, liposomal drug products, which are I think 1/3 of the submissions of FDA INDs. Nanomaterial in food and food contact material, this is really a significant interest to the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA. Targeted nanomaterial for biomedical applications, we have sessions on that here at CLINAM, and those are more complex material. If you have a targeting ligand attached to a nanoparticle with a therapeutic payload and an imaging agent, it just becomes that much more complex. And so what kind of methods do we need? What kind of standards do we need in that area, as well as the nanomaterials in personal care products? So I'm going to go through the final summaries of each of these. And bear with me, I'm not going to read everything, but this will be available publicly. We will publish this data, and then so you will have all these available publicly. So in terms of nanotechnology-derived products, again, it is co-chaired by Catherine Tyner and Ruben Peter from EMA. So they came up with the documentary standards of interest that are listed here, and the reference material as well. So again, this is based on consensus from discussions from participants. And I'm not going to read these, but some of these related to the size measurement, the surface measurements. From my personal perspective, surface measurements are the most complicated, more difficult for nanomaterial, nanoparticles. If you have some coating, if you have, let's say, polyethylene glycol coating or other kinds of coating, how much of these coatings are present? What is the heterogeneity of these? And those are really responsible for opsonization and biodistribution. So if you have changes in these surface properties, they significantly change the biodistribution, safety, and efficacy. So, but there are no standards that are currently available in that area. And so the participants came up with these documentary standards, needs, and then finally linking physicochemical measurements with clinical relevance. You may be able to do a high-resolution transmission electron microscopy to look into the structure. In many cases, it is very important. But then we need to connect what you measure to the clinical relevance. And then so those kinds of documentary standards and guides, they came up with this list, as well as a reference material. So we have many. I think 1/3 of the products are liposome-based, out of more than 350 products that Catherine Tyner is going to present an overview on. So that is close to 100 products that FDA has on liposomes. So these are the size and composition certification, the particulate material average particle size between 1 to 300 nanometers, because we do see liposomes beyond 100 nanometers, and surface functionalization relevant to medical applications. So those are the reference materials. So if I talk to my NIST colleagues and JRC colleagues, they would say, this is not good enough for us. We need a lot more details. And so we will dig into those details, but at least bringing together all these agencies, all these stakeholders, in itself is a big challenge. And then so we could do that with the help of all these agencies that participated in this global summit. In terms of medical devices, again, each session had the flexibility to come up with their own. And so they had a tiered approach, and they identified the proper techniques and protocols for biocompatibility assessment of nanomaterials are needed. So these are not necessarily nanoparticle-based. FDA has many devices, both ex vivo devices and in vivo implantable devices. So their approach is slightly different from the other sessions. So they came up with the highest tier standards with a broad addressing of general consideration of nanomaterial, and then the tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4, which is the standards that with the lowest priority provide specific techniques for specific nanomaterial. For example, if you take a gold nanoparticle and then do an AFM, from their perspective, it is very specific, and then it has a low tier. Liposomal drug products are, again, a lot we see at FDA. This is, again, co-chaired by our colleague Kumiko Sakai-Kato, who is here from Japan, as well as Wenlei Jiang, my colleague who couldn't be here from FDA Office of Generic Drugs. So their general consideration for liposomal drug products development is quality by design, QDB and design experimental approaches, and are recommended in liposomal product development geared to optimize critical quality attributes, CQAs. So they came up with these prioritized regulatory science research needs and standards for liposome-based products. Again, we still see challenges with some of the liposome-based product, and certainly the community came up with asking for more standards in that area, both guidance standards as well as reference material standards. I have 1 more minute left, so I have 3 more slides to go. So again, this is on food and food contact material. There are, again, 3 needs that were identified, mainly for food contact material detection and quantitation of nanomaterial in complex matrices or biological matrices seem to be a significant challenge, and this is something that they came up with, along with the migration protocols, artificial digestion with food matrix in vitro, and dosimetry in vitro. Targeted nanomaterial, as I mentioned, if you have a multifunctional nanoparticle, again, measurements in those cases are quite challenging. And then the complexity of analysis of this material is also difficult. So characterization methodologies are needed to evaluate the biological activity of these nanoparticle drug components. And then how much of the targeting ligand is present, what is the activity of the targeting ligand after it is attached to the nanoparticle. And then there are biological assays as well that were prioritized as needs. And then finally, the nanomaterial in personal care products. Again, there are a lot of debate as to, for them to come up with what is needed. And then the size by number standards seem to be one of the challenges consistently that we have seen across different sessions. And then so the guidance documents here are listed here. I'm not going to go through all of them. And then they came up with the short-term and medium-term. They couldn't come up with the long-term goals in this area. So with that, I will stop. My time ran out. And I would like to acknowledge all the participants that presented, chaired the session. Actually, we have a 40-page document that came out of this conference, and then that will be publicly available soon, and we'll publish that as a paper. Again, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Anil, for staying on time. We actually have a couple of minutes for questions. I saw that for the reference materials for liposomes, you mentioned dimensions of about 300 nanometers, which I think is more realistic than some other definitions I have seen, which goes only until 10 nanometers or something. So that's much more relevant for pharmaceutical liposomes in this case. Other questions from the audience? Yes, please. Could you please push the button on your microphone, please? No.
Okay. The issue of number, when we talk to most nanomedicine people, they don't think they need to know the number. But you've put up there several times that the issue of number versus size is a problem, or the need to generate number. Could you comment on that?
So again, well, this is a consensus that the community made in terms of the number measurement. For example, the European Union, is it the European Union that has a definition 50% by number in the nano range is considered as nanotechnology or nanomaterial. Now, I mean, there are so many nuances to that definition, so I don't want to simplify any of that. But how do you measure 50% by number if you have any material? If you have material at a micron size range, hundreds of nanometer range, one particle, if you break it down into a nano size, can be considered as nanotechnology because you can get millions of these particles at the small size range. But how do you measure that? So not necessarily for the definition purposes, but this is a consensus that a lot of people came up with, and the industry is also interested, especially if regulators say, okay, this is something that we consider as nanotechnology, and then industry has to come up and then have a measurement to say, okay, this is nanotechnology, this is not, does not fall under nanotechnology. I think that's one of the topics that was discussed at the meeting, but there are many other reasons that we don't have standards for number-based measurements.
Thank you very much. I think we have run out of time. I'm sorry for that. Maybe you can discuss that later. Let's thank the speaker again. Thank you, Anil.